without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboys
Get the win. I don't know, Jack. It's a big decision.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem with saying space.
Pittsburgh at Buffalo.
Thank you. I thought I was right. So anyway,
Yeah, Mac, you're really interested in these playoffs.
so
This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning. You're listening to the Mac and Jack Sports Show on Northeast Streaming Sports.
welcome to our Saturday show with Sports Memories. Welcome everyone out there. Good morning to y'all. Good morning to Jack and Doc. Glad you guys are aboard today. Glad everyone coming in today to watch this special show that we've been doing probably for the past 4 or 5 weeks now, called Sports Memories, where we go over the past of some of the greatest players, teams, icons, news stories of the past. And today is no different, as we'll be talking about Major League Baseball legend Ted Williams, the Boston Celtics of the 60s, that great team they had that dominated the NBA. We'll also be talking a little bit about college football, the Syracuse Orangemen, at a time where college football was kind of equal. Everybody had a shot at winning at one time, believe it or not, in college football. And the 1964 Browns, as they were the underdogs that year to the Baltimore Colts. As I said, good morning, everyone. And Doc, fantastic show early, just before we came on. I enjoyed it. A lot of good points you made about the Yankees. And of course, you were always upbeat, as you always are, about the Yankees. And but we're going to be talking a little bit about the Red Sox and their legendary hitter, Ted Williams.
Yeah, so today the idea for baseball is to focus on one of the greatest hitters of all time, maybe one of the greatest players of all time, though people knock his defense, and I'm not here to talk about his defense, but Ted Williams, who just happens to be my dad's favorite player of all time. So I have a special affinity, even as a Yankee fan, for Teddy Ballgame. Ted Williams was remarkable. And I think one of the things that happens is when we look at sports, we tend to say, oh, this era is better than that era. And we tend to inflate our own era and say that the players in our era have to be, must be, for any number of reasons, better than guys in another era. And I think there's a very good case that can be made. I'm not saying it's absolute. I'm not saying he definitely was. I'm not saying that he was better than maybe Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds, if you want to discount the PEDs. But he's definitely in the argument as, if not the greatest hitter of all time, one of the greatest hitters of all time. And that's Ted Williams, of course. Now, let me just tell you, let me just give you the numbers here. His lifetime batting average was .344. He hit 521 home runs. He drove home 1,839 RBIs. Just by itself, those numbers are remarkable. But what makes Ted Williams' career even more remarkable is that he basically lost 5 seasons to military service. I think the only guy who served, or at least I think the only guy really who served in both wars, World War II and Korea, was the Yankee second baseman Jerry Coleman. No great player, no Hall of Famer played in both World War II and Korea except Ted Williams. Ted Williams missed the entirety of the 1943, the 1944, and the 1945 seasons to fight in World War II. And then in 1950, he played in 1952, he played in only 6 games. And then in 1953, he played in only 37 games, basically 2 other lost seasons, as he went to fight in Korea. One other quick note about his military service. Ted Williams, especially fighting in Korea, actually flew combat missions. You know, a lot of the guys who served in the military in the wars, you know, they served, but they didn't necessarily all see combat. Some of them, you know, just spent time on bases and stuff. And that's the way it is with every war, with soldiers deployed in all sorts of different areas. But Ted Williams actually served fighter missions in Korea. But let's go back to just World War II. 1942, the year before he goes off to fight, Ted Williams leads the league in runs scored. He leads the league in home runs. He leads the league in RBIs. He leads the league in walks. He leads the league in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, which they didn't have, OPS plus, which they didn't have, and total bases. And then he misses 3 whole seasons. You're not talking about a guy who missed 3 years when he was winding down or gearing up. You're talking about a guy who's missing 3 seasons after winning the Triple Crown. The year before that, 1941, was, of course, the year he hit 406. The last guy to hit 400. And then he comes back. And what does he do? In 1946, he leads the league in runs scored. He leads the league in walks. He leads the league in on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, OPS plus, and total bases. And he wins the MVP. He didn't just lose some years to the military. He lost his prime years. And if you take that into account, you have to say this is remarkable. But here's the thing that nobody knows about Ted Williams, and this is where I'll stop and let us have a discussion about Ted Williams. In 1939, Ted Williams was 4th in the MVP voting. That was his rookie season. Ted Williams would go on to receive MVP votes in every single other full season that he played. Every single year, the voters believed he was one of the players deserving of the MVP. Now, he only won a couple MVP awards, I believe 3. No, only 2. But that is partially due to the fact that the Boston writers at times put him low on the ballot or kept him off the ballot entirely. Like for the year he hit 406, 1941, he didn't win the MVP. Joe DiMaggio did. Now, DiMaggio had his famous 56-game hitting streak, but it's hard to argue that Ted Williams wasn't the MVP. That year before he went to serve in World War II, when he won the Triple Crown, he came in second in MVP voting. Wow. So Williams, one of the absolute greats of all time, a phenomenal hitter, and a true baseball legend. And I don't think today we truly put him into perspective and truly appreciate what a great ball player he was.
Doc, correct me if I'm wrong, because you keep the stats. We talk about Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak. I believe Ted Williams owns the biggest consecutive on-base streak, 84 games or so. And to me personally, that's more impressive. If you could work a walk, I mean, a lot of times you really have to earn your way on base. And 84 games in a row getting on base, I mean, what does it matter, hit or walk, if the base is empty in that type of scenario? So, but you make a good point, Doc, about the sports writers. He had a lousy relationship with the sports writers, especially in Boston. He wasn't too accommodating to them. And at that time, the sports writers had tremendous clout. They could make or break you to an extent. And it may have cost them the MVP vote against DiMaggio, even though, like you said, how do you argue against Joe D, who hit, in 72 out of 73 games? I want to honor Joe D's 16-game hitting streak after they broke, the 56-game streak. Yeah. It could have gone either way, as far as that went. But Pete Rose said about Ted Williams when Pete Rose was in his prime, he talked about Ted Williams' era. And of course, Pete Rose said, well, we have it harder than we do. The guys of Ted Williams' time couldn't have done, what we did. And then he said, but Ted Williams, if he played today, he still would have hit over 400. Like the one guy Pete Rose gave a pass was Ted Williams. He said he's the exception.
You
I
know,
don't know whether you agree or disagree, but he felt Ted Williams would have been every bit as good when Pete Rose played that he was, you know.
All right, I'm
during
going to give you a
the 40s,
couple of
50s.
crazy stats here for Ted Williams. This is what's going to blow your mind. In 1941, his on base percentage 553. He was on base more than he wasn't on base. The next year it was 499, which basically means every other time he got up, he got on base. It was 499 in 1947. It was 497 in 1946 and 1948. It was 490 in 1949. And then he had a 500 on base. These are the shortened years. I'm sorry. Then he had a 513 on base percentage in 1954, a 526 on base percentage in 1957 when he was 38 years old. His lifetime on base percentage, 482. The idea in the game is to get on base. He got on base better than any player in history.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And let's play a little what if. 5 years, well, 3 full years, and mostly for the other 2 years out of baseball. How many more home runs this guy would have had? How many more hits would this guy have had? How many more RBIs would this guy have had? Could he have surpassed Babe Ruth?
I think so.
If he hit 20 something home runs a year in those 5 years, could he have gone by Babe Ruth? Could we be talking about him as the greatest hitter ever? Could he? I mean, you know, that's first part of what if. And of course, you got to take into consideration where he played. If he played in Yankee Stadium, you know, there was always an argument. If DiMaggio played in, you know, Fenway Park, how many more home runs would he have had? If Ted Williams played in Yankee Stadium with that short porch, how many more home runs would he have had? Just not even counting those 5 years gone. So, I mean, of course, you play where you play, but I mean, this guy was extraordinary. The guy was extraordinary with a bat. He was as today, he was like a Jedi with his laser, his saber. I mean, he was unbelievable. He took care of those bats like they were his babies. I mean, he was in on his bats being made. You see him in the dugout sanding his bat. I mean, this guy was a professional hitter in every way, like a guy is like a mechanic with his tools. That was his tool. And he took care of those bats like I've never seen in any baseball videos I've ever watched in my life. This guy was unbelievable. And it's a shame, you know, he never got that World Series when he was two-time Triple Crown winner, not just one, but twice he won the Triple Crown. Who can really say that? And as far as Pete Rose saying only Ted Williams could play in his era is ridiculous. We know DiMaggio and Mantle, all those could have too. But the point is, we're talking about Ted Williams. And me, a Yankee fan, I respect the Red Sox. I don't know if Ted Williams is he the face of Boston. Yastrzemski, Big Papi.
Oh yeah, bigger. He's
Roger Clemens. I mean, he's got to be
Ted
the
Williams.
guy.
Yes,
he's got to be
absolutely.
the guy. Unbelievable man. Unbelievable player.
At least for Boston baseball, it's Ted Williams and then everybody else.
Ted Williams, he later became the manager of the Washington Senators, and he, you know, and Eddie Brinkman, they had a weak hitting shortstop, the Senators. And all of a sudden, Eddie Brinkman became a decent hitter under Ted Williams, you know, who tutored him, took him under his wing. So, I mean, Ted Williams made a real science of hitting. That was his big thing.
That was the name of his book, The Science of
Hitting.
Hitting.
Yeah, I mean, he was, let's be honest about it, he wasn't a complete ball player. You know, he's one-dimensional a hitter. He was Big Papi before Big Papi. You could argue that. I mean, but Ted Williams had to play the field because there was no DH. But if there was a DH during the time Ted Williams played, you get the feeling he would have happily just been a DH and done nothing else. You know, other players wouldn't have been as happy because when they put the question to Reggie Jackson in the after his first season with the Yankees, because he had defensive struggles about the possibility of him being a DH going forward, he shut it down. He said, maybe all the way at the end of my career, but absolutely not, because it was an ego thing. You know, you wanted your profile to be there, being on the field all the time, but you got the feeling Ted Williams would have been. I'm repeating myself. Not only happy to have been a DH, he may have been a better hitter if he was only a DH. If he didn't have to worry about being on the field, could you imagine if Ted Williams could just concentrate and study the pitches the whole time, not have any energy, being on defense, going on the field, being a little more tired, coming back to the dugout? He would have probably been marginally better as a hitter if he was just a DH.
Possibly.
I don't know. How bad of an outfielder was he? I mean, Jack says he's, he was sort of maybe.
I think he was an indifferent player. I don't think his D WAR, which is defensive WAR for his career, was negative 13.3 over 19 seasons, which means 6 seasons he had. If you just take it as an average, he was a average or plus fielder. But he was never terrible. I mean, you look at some statistics, and fielding statistics are also skewed because we don't have all the data. Obviously, you don't know where the balls were necessarily hit. It's all just estimates. I think he was not a positive defender, obviously, but I think his defensive ineptitude or whatever is overblown too.
So would you compare him to maybe a Juan Soto?
I think Juan Soto's a great example. Yes.
No, Juan Soto isn't a bad defensive outfielder. You could call him average if you want, or maybe a little better than average. But no, Ted Williams didn't have a good rep as a fielder, not at all. Billy Martin was very low on Ted Williams as an all-around ball player. He's just a great hitter, and that's it.
Well, that's what.
I can't believe, because I'm about to do this, because I have these arguments on Start Spreading the News all the time. But in Washington, for his career, Juan Soto is a negative 4.6 over 7 seasons defensively with D WAR. And so you're looking at 4.6 over 7 or 13.3 over 19 years. That's very similar. And Juan Soto also is similar to Ted Williams in that Ted Williams would get criticized because he wouldn't swing at balls out of the strike zone. He knew the strike zone so well. He said, if they're not going to give me a strike, I'm not going to swing at it. And sometimes people would say, you ought to swing more and walk less. Of course, the name of the game is to get on base. And people levy those same types of criticisms against Juan Soto as well. Yeah. I think Juan Soto's a better fielder than people give him credit for. I agree with you, Jack, but his numbers don't necessarily reflect that. And I think Ted Williams was probably a better fielder than people give him credit for. And his numbers don't necessarily reflect that either.
Of course, the older you get, the less, you're not as fast as you were and all that stuff. So, I mean, if you're going to play out in the field for, I don't know, how many years, 19 years, I mean, imagine you're going to slow down a little bit. I don't remember him ever going to first base or anything like that. All right. So
Yaz did, but Ted Williams didn't.
I don't think today in baseball we have a major debate between two players who's the best. The last time I think it took place, a really big debate would be Mantle-Mays before Mantle fell off the cliff late in his career. But before that, the big debate was Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, who was better. That was the big debate in baseball because we put more emphasis on hitting during Ted Williams' era than we do now. I mean, hitting was just about everything. Fielding was way secondary, not even close. Running the bases wasn't even close. I mean, we were so stats oriented then. We still are, but we look at batting average. If a guy struck out a lot, we'd hold it against him. Yeah, even though today it doesn't mean quite as much, but it used to mean so much then.
Yeah. Walking was sort of like the easy way out. People thought, right? Instead of actually trying to hit the ball, which does make no sense. You're on base, you're a potential run. Of course, you want to hit when the guy's in scoring position, of course, if you can. I don't know. Is there any other? That's a great topic, Jack. Is there any other, a competition or
Ruth and Garrett, I guess, same team, right? Ruth and Garrett, guys.
Yeah. I mean, A-Rod and Jeter. I mean, is there any other? I don't think so, right? Is there any other?
I don't think people were really debate. There was what do you say, Doc? A-Rod, Jeter, did they?
I think
fall
everybody
into-
recognized that A-Rod was the better hitter. It's not even a question.
No, player. We're talking about player.
Well, A-Rod was a better defensive shortstop than when he
Yeah.
came to the Yankees than Jeter was.
But I think the Yankee fans who made the comparison, A-Rod and Jeter, a lot of them would lean towards Jeter because they talk about intangibles, and all. And A-Rod, and when they were doing the comparison, A-Rod was a third baseman. So Jeter was, is this fair to say that Jeter was as good a shortstop as A-Rod was a third baseman? Or for the Yankees? Is that
Probably.
fair to say?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably fair.
I would say that, but I think you're right, Jack or Doc. If you can think of a more modern day comparison of a competition between two players, I mean, besides pitchers, I mean, I guess you got some pitchers that you could more modern day say who's better and who's worse. But I can't think of a position player that really there's a comparison to a competition during the year with.
The interesting thing is that there was that story, true or not, that the Yankees and the Red Sox made a trade. It was probably in 47 or 48 or 49 for DiMaggio for Williams. So DiMaggio could play in Fenway and Ted Williams could play in Yankee Stadium. And then, they supposedly were drunk when they made the deal. And the next morning, Tom Yawkey said, they supposedly signed the deal on a napkin or something at a bar. And then the next morning, he's like, no way, I'm not making that trade. I wrote an article on this. People think that, DiMaggio, and he was a better all-around player. There's no doubt. As Jack was saying, he could play better defense. He could run the bases better. But if the Yankees had made that trade, they would have by far gotten the better of that deal, without even a doubt. DiMaggio might have been the better all-around player, but for their career, Ted Williams' career truly outshines DiMaggio's. And even if you want to debate that, DiMaggio's career ends after 1951 and Ted Williams sticks around until 1960. Could you imagine the Yankees of the 50s with Ted Williams out in left field? That would have been unbelievable.
Mm.
Yeah, George Steinbrenner actually tried to get Ted Williams to come on board as a hitting coach. And Williams thought it over. He said, no, I can't wear pinstripes. So he had that loyalty to the Red Sox because it really would have been devastating to the Red Sox, to see Ted Williams helping the Yankees. That would have been fun to watch.
I wish he was around today. It might help us out a little bit and was with our team as a hitting coach now.
Well, guys do switch over. Tom Seaver came to the Yankee broadcast booth, and Met fans were a bit upset, asking him how he could do it. And he said, no one else was offering me a job. So he put it back, on the Mets' lap. I mean, if they didn't want him to leave, they could have hired him.
I think those arguments are silly. People have to have jobs. People need to work. And right, your loyalty is, if the Yankees are going to pay you for the rest of your life to not work, okay, then that's fine. But if they're not giving you a paycheck and another team offers you money to do a job, why would you not take the job just because out of loyalty to a team? I don't understand that at all. Well, people got mad at David Cohn at the end of his career when he went to pitch for the Red Sox. Like, why? Sure. They offered him a contract. They were going to let him continue his career. So
David Wells, David Wells, and he had no one was offering him a deal. Well, that's how fans are. Johnny Damon still won't go back to Fenway Park. He was really hurt by the Red Sox fans booing him when he came back to Boston after signing with the Yankees. And he said it was 4 years. The Red Sox offered me $40 million. The Yankees offered me $52 million. The extra $12 million, I was able to buy a big house, free and clear, and pay it off. And they're booing me after all we've been through together. And he was hurt by it. And late in his career, the Red Sox tried to get Damon to come back. Part of it was nostalgia. He refused to waive his rights. He was with Tampa Bay at the time to go back to the Red Sox and never did. But he always wanted a second act with the Yankees. And Damon always said the Yankees were the best team to play for.
Quick question before we move on to the Boston Celtics. Is there any other batter that emulates the way Ted Williams was with his bats? I've not heard of any other batter that gets involved in the making of their own bats that is, I know a lot of them, I would imagine, buy from some company or another. I don't know if they have their bats individually made and weighed and all the stuff that Ted Williams did. Is there any other batters that you know of that has ever done that, Doc or Jack?
There was a stories that Joe Jackson treated his bat, Black Betsy, the same way that Ted Williams did, that he cared for his bat, there's even stories that he slept with his bat and things like that he kept his bat tucked in at night to keep it warm so it'd be ready to hit the next day. But I haven't seen a whole lot of stories like that, but I'm definitely not an expert on that.
You know what the difference is between Ted Williams and hitters like Rod Carew and Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs? Ted Williams had power.
That's correct.
That was the difference involved. He was a home run threat. Those other guys weren't really a serious home run threat. Every time Ted Williams stepped to the plate, imagine that, a major home run threat who could spray the ball all over the field. No, I shouldn't say that. He was a pull hitter. Oh, yeah, one thing we didn't address on the shift. I'm sorry. Oh, that's important. Ted Williams, the one thing he never quite solved in his head was the shift. He kept going back and forth, and he would try to beat the shift, just hit the ball through it, force, and he never quite, got a philosophy down. In this day and age, the shift not being allowed, imagine how that would have helped Ted Williams.
I don't think the shift was used all that much in his career. I think that's overblown, but I don't have any statistics on that. Lou Boudreau used it with the Indians. I don't know how much other teams really shifted on him. And the results speak for themselves. Whether or not they shifted on him or not, the guy had a 344 lifetime batting average.
But it was yeah.
There you go. So with Ted Williams in the back seat now, let's step up with the Boston Celtics. Jack's going to tell us a little bit about the team that dominated the 60s.
In the 1960s, the Boston Celtics, and we stay on Boston here, imagine that time Ted Williams retires. The Celtics, even though they won a couple NBA titles in the late 50s, in the 1960s, 9 championships in the 10 years in a decade. Imagine that. No other sports team in America is quite done that. I think the Yankees did like 7 in 10 years after they won. Well, no, not 7 in 10 years. I'm counting 1949, beginning in 1950. So I think the Yankees had like 6 in 10 years or something like that. But the Celtics, 9 in 10 years. And they did it with a mixture of players. I mean, entering the 1960s, they had gotten Bill Russell in the late 50s. They had Red Auerbach as their coach and GM, an absolute genius. He had a vision. I mean, he signed the NBA's first black player. Red Auerbach put out the first all-black lineup in the NBA. He was a visionary. He only cared about winning. He was smart. He was fair. He was ahead of his time. And it paid off big time for the Boston Celtics getting a jump on the opposition. And the Celtics, I mean, the great players they put out there, obviously led by Bill Russell. Bob Cousy played for the Celtics through 1963. And at the time Bob Cousy played in the 50s into the 60s, he was the Magic Johnson of his time. I mean, a great dribbler, the things he would do. I mean, I remember when I went to college and I'd take a basketball class. The instructor would be talking about Bob Cousy's two-hand set shot. Imagine today, you don't have time on a two-hand set shot the way you did, then. But the players they got around, Bill Russell, Bill Sharman, Tom Heinsohn, Sam Jones, great outside shooter. Casey Jones would later coach the team, a defensive specialist. Casey Jones actually would be Larry Bird's coach, later on when the Celtics won a couple of NBA titles. And John Havlicek, who Bill Russell said was the greatest all-around player he ever saw. And you could talk about the level of opposition in the 60s, but there was great opposition. There were the duels between Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. We talked about the debates in baseball, Mantle Mays, Williams, DiMaggio, Ruth, and Garrett, but nothing compared to Russell and Chamberlain because they went head to head against one another. And who was better? Wilt had the stats, Russell had the titles. And that basically was the difference. But there's a certain amount of luck that comes into it, guys. Excuse me. In 1962, in the NBA Finals, Game 7, the Celtics are playing the Lakers, all tied up. Frank Selby, the Lakers guard, at the buzzer has a wide open 12-foot shot. He misses it. Had he made it, the Lakers win the championship. So there's so much like luck that goes into it. But we hear about dynasties. The Packers had a great dynasty in the 60s, but they won 5 championships in a 7-year period. And keep in mind, the Celtics won 9 in a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And the Celtics really epitomized what a dynasty was all about. They also won a championship or 2 in the 1970s. And then in the 80s, Larry Bird came on. And they had, they went on a run where they won 3 championships there. And obviously, they won a championship this year. But the thing that makes the Celtic franchise so legendary goes back to what they really did in the 60s, 9 championships in 10 years. And you heard the Celtics players being interviewed after they won the championship this year. They talked about the tradition, what those guys did in the past, the legacy that they built. And so there's never been another franchise like the Boston Celtics won in the 1960s.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Jack. 9 of those champions, 8 were consecutive. I don't know of any other sports franchise that did. I don't even know if there's a hockey franchise that ever won 8 consecutive world championships that I know of. And Bill Russell, there was, of course, he was also made head coach. Was the first black head coach in sports history, professional sports history. I think that's when Red Auerbach, is that when he moved up to GM, Jack?
Yeah, Red Auerbach moved up to GM. Bill Russell was a player coach. And because he was such a great leader, Bill Russell. I kind of wonder why they don't do it today. The NBA was a little different then. I remember Dave DeBusschere was 24 years old. We think of Dave DeBusschere, great player with the New York Knicks. He was a 24-year-old head coach of the Detroit Pistons. Imagine that. You take a 24-year-old today and make him the coach of your team. I mean, it's like mind-boggling to think, but sports kind of changed a bit.
Jack,
Dave DeBusschere was also a pitcher for the White Sox. Talk about, a career.
Yeah,
he even owned Ring Magazine for a while, the boxing publication.
And I heard he was a great surfer too on the side. But Jack, great, a great point. Why doesn't the NBA do this now? They bring in this guy Redick, who was a former player, right, a long time ago, and was an announcer. And you got LeBron James there that has as much experience, if not more, probably, and definitely a better player than Redick. Why didn't they just would LeBron James accept that? Would he accept that title?
He would have, and you allow him to bring in his own guys to work the bench, who he respects and listens to. And LeBron would have brought in his X's and O's guy, a couple of them, and he would have been happy that it's ultimately his decision and this and that. And he would have told his coaches, as far as his son goes, no, you coach, you decide with him this and that. And I think LeBron absolutely would have taken it. It never came up. I mean, I was the one that was mentioning it all along. I thought it'd be a really good move, because obviously a player can't coach the game when he's on the floor. I mean, it's very, very difficult. But LeBron has such a dominant personality, and he commands such respect because he's a superstar. You could do it with him. And that's what the Celtics did with Bill Russell. Bill Russell commanded such respect. And all the players looked at him. There was such greatness there with Bill Russell. And Bill Russell had certain veterans on the team that played with him for years. Yeah. So he heard them out. And the Celtics knew what they had to do. They were kind of like a well-oiled machine. Because like I said, those guys had been together for a long time. It wasn't like free agency where you had the revolving door, guys coming and going.
So there's always been, well, at one time, I still think I could debate this and I could be valid. Bill Russell was considered the greatest NBA player of all time. If you talk, now, of course, there's been people that scored more and blah, blah, blah. If you talk as a leader, as a defensive player, scored when he had to, he didn't have to really that much. The championships, I think you could still argue that overall, that maybe Bill Russell is the greatest basketball player of all time, Jack.
The comparison to Ted Williams all of a sudden clicked to me. Ted Williams wasn't considered the greatest all around, maybe the greatest hitter by some of all time. Bill Russell wasn't a scorer. He averaged 15 points a game. So, but what he did on defense, he was on defense what Ted Williams was to hitting. I mean, the guy was just phenomenal on defense. And the thing that built Bill Russell up with the Boston Celtics in the 60s, he made his teams better. Now, the argument is this. Would the Celtics still have won the same way, the same amount of times if they have Wilt Chamberlain there instead of Bill Russell? Wilt Chamberlain, who was close friends with Bill Russell, despite the rivalry, and they didn't talk for a little while, but they ended their life as close friends again, said, no, the Celtics wouldn't have been as good if I was there because my skills were a little too overpowering for the team concept, and there's some reality to that. Chamberlain had to have the ball. He would overpower you, completely overpower you. Russell couldn't overpower you, but he made all the guys around him better players. I mean, so what do you really want? I guess if you're starting an expansion team, you're better off with a Wilt Chamberlain. He'll win you more games. But if you need the missing piece, then you would have been better off with Bill Russell. And just one more thing, they asked Phil Jackson. People forget that Phil Jackson was a player who was on two of the Knicks championship teams. People forget that. What we were talking about before, fans booing old-time players. Why not clap for Phil Jackson? He was a two-time champion on the Knicks as a player, but they hate him in New York. He played, against Bill Russell, and he obviously coached Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. They asked Phil Jackson once who's the greatest player of all time, and he said Bill Russell. Okay? He would give Russell a little edge over Jordan. He said it only once, and then he didn't want to dwell on it and talk about it anymore. But he played with the guy, and he saw what Bill Russell meant to the Celtics. Like I said, Matt, I said 9 championships in 10 years. It was actually 8 in a row.
Right. And good morning, James. Glad to have you on. And yes, you can compare greats a decade to decade. You can compare them. The greats back then would be great now. But I know there's a lot of rule changes. We've discussed this a lot. And this is where I could debate anybody that Bill Russell could be the greatest of all time. Wilt Chamberlain, maybe the greatest dominating center of all time, I would say. Michael Jordan would be in the conversation of the greatest dominating basketball player of all time. LeBron James would be in that conversation. I think if you had an all-star offensive player, say a Michael Jordan, who better to guard him than Bill Russell? This is where I think if you had an all-star, great, a LeBron James, put Bill Russell on.
Well, he was a center. At the time, the game's different now. You don't have really the traditional centers as much, and the guys who are considered centers, that they play on the outside a little more. They don't play as much directly under the basket, as Wilt Chamberlain would do. So it's kind of like it's a different game in a sense.
Yes, I agree. I'm just saying if you're going to talk defense and you're going to talk person to person, I would love to have Bill Russell guard anybody. I don't care who they were. He was only 6'10", Jack? 6'11"?
Well, he wasn't like Jordan took the ball from from the foul line and he'd drive to the basket a lot. Bill Russell didn't go with guys. He would meet you at the basket. He would force players to change direction.
Right.
You know, like that type of thing. But Michael Jordan's virtually unstoppable. You know, once he gets going, he has his momentum going.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Russell would shut him down. I think it would be a hell of a contest, though. I think Russell was a great athlete too. So I mean, I could see him blocking a couple of shots, grabbing a couple of rebounds, and of course Jordan going by him too. I see that too. I mean, I think that would be a heck of a matchup. Really interesting. I would pay.
He was smart though, Russell too. And Wilt Chamberlain loved blocking shots. He was a great shot blocker, but Wilt would block a shot with force. He would swat the ball out of bounds. Bill Russell would block a shot just enough, but the other team would still have the ball when Wilt would swat it out of bounds. Bill Russell would block a shot softly, so you know he could get possession or to keep it in bounds where his team can, you know, get possession of the ball.
Right.
That would be like a difference, you know, involved. But you know, you can argue who is better, Chamberlain than Russell. But I will say this: Russell was as tough-minded as any player. He was very tough-minded in there because Chamberlain was a bit fragile mentally. Remember Willis Reed went limping out, that famous thing with the Knicks when they won the championship, limping onto the court, and they all cheered. Chamberlain later said in his book, watching Reed come out there, he got the feeling that the Knicks were a team of destiny. Okay? Russell said later on, if he saw Reed limping out there, he would have taken his other leg out from under him. He would have showed him no mercy. He would have put, he would have been right down Reed's throat immediately. He would have battered Reed, did whatever needed to be done. And the argument would be this for a while. Well, Russell had the better teams than Chamberlain. But did he? Maybe marginally. But look who Chamberlain had with the 76ers. Billy Cunningham, Hal Greer. Later with the Lakers, he had Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, you know. And again, you can argue that Chamberlain was better if you want. It's like arguing, Doc, who's better, Willie Mays or Hank Aaron. It's that type of argument.
Yep.
I'll say Bill Russell was Willie Mays, and you could say Chamberlain was Hank Aaron. That's the type of comparison, you know, I care to do. But what a rivalry! When I was a kid, I remember one last thing. When I was a kid, watching them go head to head, I was hoping that rivalry would never end. I remember as a kid saying, "I better cherish this. I'm never going to see anything like this again." You want to know something, guys? I haven't. All these decades and decades later, I haven't. And I remember my thoughts as a kid, just watching them, you know, on ABC Channel 7, you know, and the Sunday afternoon game of the week. You know, we didn't have ESPN all these games. That game of the week, believe me, we took it in. It
was a big thing. It sure was.
Yeah.
So great on the Celtics, Jack. I'm gonna talk a little college football. We're gonna go back to when it was more fair for everybody to play and get good players without throwing multi-million dollars at them or offering them all this good stuff. It was a little bit more cleaner back then. And bowl games actually decided championships. Who won the biggest bowl game? In the 1959-60 season, believe it or not, the Syracuse Orangemen were the number one team in the country. And they had a 10-3-3 record. They were coached by Blenton Collier, who had 22 winning seasons in a row. Unbelievable. I mean, talk about a record. And back then, as I said, this is when, you know, actually military schools could compete with the bigger universities. And I kind of miss these days. You know, Jack, I kind of miss the computer deciding who. I mean, you didn't really know till the end of the year after the bowl games were complete who was the number one team, if I remember right. I mean, they had the rankings, but I kind of miss it now. There is no more. There's hardly any more questions on who the top 4 is going to be anymore. It's already decided before the beginning of the year. I enjoy the old college football days a lot better than I like them now. And of course, Syracuse back then only had the greatest running back of all time, argued Jim Brown, who helped them have some really good years after he came out of high school in the 1956 season. There was a running back that was going to join Jim Brown after he finished with Syracuse. He died of leukemia before he got there, but he was the first Black Heisman.
Bernie Davis, yeah.
Yes, the first Black Heisman Trophy winner in history came from Syracuse. And the Syracuse Orangemen were a power back then, and now Syracuse is lucky to make a bowl game at 50% now, a 500 record. So interesting times for Syracuse. They did produce some other great backs. Maybe for a while were known as Running Back University, because not only did they produce Jim Brown, but Floyd Little, Larry Zonka, even Joe Morris from the Giants came from Syracuse. They've had a lot of great running backs.
Donovan McNabb is quarterback.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, they've had some really great players, a couple of Hall of Famers coming out of Syracuse. So, believe it or not, Syracuse was not just a basketball powerhouse. It was a football powerhouse at one time. So, that was interesting to me. The Cleveland Browns of 1964, Paul, thank you, Marvin Harrison. There you go. Let's throw another one in there. All right, James. Paul Brown left the Browns as and went on to coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. The year after he left, a coach by the name of Blanton
Collier.
Thank you. He coached them to a championship game against the Baltimore Colts. Baltimore Colts were favored. Cleveland was heavy underdogs that year. The Colts had the offense of Johnny Unitas. They had Lenny Moore then John Mackey. And Cleveland had Jim Brown, really. And their defense is pretty much what kept them in the game. It was 0-0 at halftime. Jim Brown ends up rushing for 143 yards. And the Cleveland Browns shut out the Baltimore Colts 27-0. Listen, Cleveland had a great team during the Jim Brown era, even before the Jim Brown era when they had Otto Graham. And this team has not been to a Super Bowl at all. And, Jack, I don't know, and Doc can get in there on this too. I don't know why coaches, general managers don't go back to see what works in the past. I really don't. Everybody wants to have, invent the new cookie. Everybody wants to have the new product, but they don't go back to what actually won. And I don't know why coaches and franchises don't do that. Because you could say football's evolved and all that good stuff. Listen, this evolved to a certain point. There's still the basics that has you win football. Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year with a great defense, a very good running game, and a quarterback and making some timely passing, a big play here and there. They won football the old way. And I don't know why teams that have great pass, like the Cleveland Browns, don't go back, like the Giants, don't go back to what made them great. I don't understand. Let's see. Blame Ernest Biner. Blame Ernest Biner.
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't see the game. I saw a few plays. I remember being a kid and I wanted to play with my friends. It was in barely at the beginning of when I was a sports fan. And the Brown Colt game. And the only recollection I have of that game, Jim Brown having the ball and about 4 Colt players trying to tackle him. Okay. Yes. But the idea that the Browns shut the Colts out with Johnny Unitas 27-0, that's the equivalent of a Tom Brady team being shut out. A Peyton Manning team being shut out because Johnny Unitas in his era was revered as those other two were during theirs.
Yeah, I agree. And the Browns defense does not get much of the deserved credit as they do. They did have one of the better defenses.
You make a point about championships, and this is why I sometimes get a little annoyed at the attitude of Yankee fans. No offense, Doc. You kind of get spoiled if you're a fan of a franchise. The Cleveland Browns, 3 years before the Super Bowl came into existence, they won an NFL championship, but they've never even been to a Super Bowl, let alone win it. They haven't even lost in a Super Bowl. That's how bad things have been, in the 56 years or so of Super Bowls that have been going on. And when a team wins a championship, it should hold you over for a while, especially multiple championships. But if a team wins a championship now, and 2 years later they're not good, everyone's upset, and it's like, I could understand discontent. You want to win each year. I get that completely. But enjoy the darn achievement that you had. It should last basically a lifetime. You have that type of achievement.
So the Yankees shouldn't win another World Series because they
won? Of course you want to, but as long as they're in the mix, it is so. My point is, it's so hard to win a championship.
All right, so I don't disagree with that. In fact, when I was at Game 6 in 1996 with my dad, and the Yankees won it all, and I said, you know what? Now I know what it feels like, because when they won in 77 and 78, I was 9 and 10 years old. I was just a little kid. And I'm like, I don't care if the Yankees win the World Series next year. But I think there does come a point in time. The Yankees haven't been to the World Series since 2009. That's a long time for fans to be saying, it's okay, let's keep waiting till next year. Maybe we'll be better. That's a long time to ask the fans to wait. And I think that one other difference that I bring up a lot and that a lot of people discount is the Yankees brand is world championships. You can't go into a gift shop. You can't open up a magazine that the Yankees produce. You can't watch a Yankee telecast without them saying the 27-time world champion New York Yankees, the greatest franchise in the sport. Now, if you're going to advertise that, you're going to market that, you're going to sell products on that, you can't go this many years without winning one. It's just like, we are the greatest, but we really aren't.
It's hard because I agree with Jack to a point, and I agree with you to a point. I don't think the Yankees are doing everything they can to win a World Series. But what Jack is saying is true, too. I've seen the 77, 78 World Series and this, when they went there in 76 and all that good stuff. And how happy I was to see Chris Chambliss, hit that home run that propelled him into the World Series. I'll never forget that feeling. And with the Yankees, in fact, to me, Doc, you're saying 96, that was a greater joy I had to the Yankees in the 90s because we were so bad for so long.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the feeling with the Cleveland Browns, right? They haven't ever had it. If they won a Super Bowl, these guys would be over the moon, and they would never forget that one moment. So I get what Jack is saying. I get what you're saying, but
you can't win every year. But
let me ask you this. Let me ask you about this. There are 30 teams, let's say in Major League Baseball, for example, 30 teams. How many franchises are real? Everyone wants to win. We know that. Are really trying to win. Well, okay, a team like the Oakland Athletics, no. Colorado Rockies, no. They know they're not going to win the World Series, but about 15 to 20 of them really are locked into winning, going to the World Series. So let's say about 15. Let's say about half. And what is the law of averages of any one particular team winning it? Like the Dodgers get Ohtani, obviously the expectation is they're making a serious run of it, but it's going to be so hard because there's so much great competition now. It's not like the past American League, National League, you win the pennant, get the best record, you're automatically in the World Series. It was easier to win a World Series years ago than it is now.
There's a lot more playoffs. there's a lot more playoffs. I mean,
Yeah.
right? So I mean,
Right. Which then says that you don't have to be as good to win a World Series.
that's the opposite. That's the opposite.
The other argument there, Jack, is the second place team in 1954 doesn't go to the playoffs. They don't get a chance to beat the Cleveland Indians.
And the Yankees, good chance they would have beaten Cleveland that year, and the Yankees would have advanced to the World Series and maybe.
Correct, but
beat
nowadays
the
you can come in
Giants, but it
third
didn't
place
happen.
and reach the World Series.
Right. You know, an interesting way to end the show. We've had a football team that has been dominant for 20 years, other than the past 3 years, has gone to 10 Super Bowls and won 7. How soon before the Patriot fans, I'm going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow too, how much time do the Patriot fans give the GM and the head coach of the Patriots to go to the playoffs or go to another Super Bowl? I mean, do they give them 10 years, or is it 3 years, or is it 20 years? I mean, how much longer can they blame Bill Belichick for the Patriots being bad? That's going to be interesting.
Well, they're spoiled, Mac. In the past, the Patriots, during those couple of decades, the Belichick-Brady era, if they would lose in the AFC Championship game, it would be a disappointing year if they didn't go to the Super Bowl. And so many other franchises, if they went to the AFC and NFC Championship game, they considered a great success. So but my point is, fan bases get spoiled. You know what? Once you've had a lot of success.
I don't disagree with that. That fan bases get spoiled, but there's also the other part of this is, teams like the New England Patriots, I'm sure, but I can speak to the Yankees definitely. Those fans pay some of the highest prices for memorabilia, for tickets, for hot dogs, and all that. And when you're paying that kind of money, there's an expectation. I've told this story a million times before. I was a partial season ticket holder for the Yankees for, 8 or 9 or 10 years or so, back from the old stadium into the new stadium. And then Hal Steinbrenner started saying, I really got to keep a look on my payroll. I don't want to really pay this. When the Yankees were going out and getting every big-time player, I thought, well, it's my job as a fan to go out and support this. I want them to get A-Rod. I want them to get Mark Teixeira. So if I want them to spend big, I better do my part as the fan. And then I heard the Yankee owner going, well, I'm not going to go after this guy or that guy because I have to watch my payroll. And at that same time, my oldest son, and I have 3, so I had 2 more coming down the pike, was going to college. And I went, well, if you're not going to invest, if you're not fully invested, well, maybe I shouldn't be either. And that's when I gave up my season ticket package. There's a couple other reasons, but that was part of my thinking.
Well,
So, Doc, you picked Yankee season tickets over your son's college tuition to pay for.
No, I picked this college tuition.
Oh, okay.
I said, if they're going to watch their money, I'm going to watch mine. So no more Yankee season tickets. Thanks, Yankees.
So, and with all due respect, Doc, I bet a lot of fans of the very good teams are also paying a lot more than they did before, and they're not going to the World Series either. Hell to the Arizona Diamondbacks, right? There you go. You probably get a season ticket there for about $50, and they went to the World Series. Anyway, thanks for joining us. We'll be back with a big football show tomorrow, the best football show on earth at 8 a.m. I want to thank Doc. Great job on Ted Williams. Jack, great job on the Celtics. And I hope everybody learned something today, and I hope you enjoyed the show. So have a great day, everybody. Enjoy your 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you back tomorrow with the big football show on Northeast Streaming Sports.